Hi Reddit, I'm 31F, married to my husband Mark, 32M, for 7 years now, and until recently, I thought my life was pretty normal. We weren't rich or glamorous, but we had a small house, 2 dogs, stable jobs, and a rhythm that just worked. I don't post much, but after what happened last week, I can't stop thinking about it. I need to get this story out because I still don't fully believe what's happening, and maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it. It started 5 years ago with my younger sister, Brielle. She was 22 when she just vanished. Not kidnapped, not officially missing, she just packed up one night and left town without telling anyone. She'd always been the impulsive type, a bit of a wild card, constantly chasing the next high or adventure. My parents were used to her disappearing for a few days here and there, but this time, she never came back. No calls, no texts, no social media. Nothing. For 5 whole years, she was a ghost. We all thought something awful had happened. My mom even filed a missing person report. I grieved her. Truly. She was my only sibling. We'd had our differences, especially over how she handled money and relationships, but she was still my sister. And not knowing whether she was alive or dead made something inside me go cold. Eventually, we had to let it go. There were no leads, no sightings. She just became a part of the past, this open wound we learned to carry. Then, last Saturday morning, Mark and I were in the kitchen making pancakes when the doorbell rang. We weren't expecting anyone, and honestly, we don't get many visitors out here. He peeked through the window and froze. Told me there was someone on the porch who looked exactly like Brielle. I thought he was joking. I opened the door, and there she was. A little older, hair longer, face thinner, but it was definitely her. She had this weird, serene expression on her face, like she wasn't surprised to see me. Like walking back into our lives after vanishing for half a decade was no big deal. Then I noticed her stomach. She was very obviously pregnant, like due any day now pregnant. I was still in shock, trying to process how she could even be standing in front of me, and then she just dropped the bomb without blinking. She said, "The baby is Mark's." That was it. No hello, no apology for disappearing, just that. My blood ran cold. Mark stood behind me, completely silent. I turned to him, waiting for him to say something, anything to tell me this was just one of Brielle's twisted jokes. But he just stared at her, mouth slightly open, like he'd forgotten how to speak. That silence? That was the beginning of the unraveling. I don't even know how I stayed standing. I think my body just went into autopilot, because the next thing I remember, I was ushering Brielle into the house like it was just a normal visit. Like she hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of our marriage. Mark still hadn't said a word, and honestly, that scared me more than anything. We all sat down in the living room. I felt like I was floating above my own life, watching this weird, silent movie unfold. Brielle looked calm. That same half-smile on her face, like she was proud of herself. She kept rubbing her belly like this was a hallmark moment. She told me she'd been living out west for the past few years. Said she was finding herself and had gotten into some spiritual healing nonsense, working on a goat farm or something. None of it made sense. She sounded like a completely different person, like someone who'd replaced my chaotic little sister with a chilled-out pod version. And then, without blinking, she said it again. That the baby was Mark's. That they had reconnected briefly before she left town. My brain locked up. I looked at Mark, waiting for the denial. Waiting for him to get angry, to tell her she was insane. But all he did was shake his head and whisper, "That's not possible." His voice was quiet. Way too quiet. Not angry. Not shocked. Just controlled. Which is when something snapped inside me. I asked him, flat out, if they'd ever slept together. And that's when I learned the first ugly truth. Yes, they had. Once. One night. Right before she left town. He said it meant nothing. That it was a mistake, that he'd felt awful about it, that it only happened because she was upset and he was trying to comfort her, and things just went too far. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. He said he never told me because he thought she was gone for good and it would only cause pain. That he regretted it every single day since. And now she was back. With a baby. Claiming it was his. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But I couldn't even move. I just stared at them both, my sister and my husband, 2 people who had kept a secret like this from me for 5 whole years. And all Brielle did was sit there like she was waiting for applause. She even had the nerve to say she didn't come back for money or drama, just truth. That word made my stomach turn. Truth? After 5 years of silence, this was the truth? I got up, told them both I needed air, and walked straight out the front door barefoot. And I stayed out there, sitting on the porch steps like a shell of myself, until the sun went down. When I finally came back inside, Brielle was gone. Mark was on the couch, head in his hands. And when he looked up, he said something that scared me more than anything else he'd said that day. He said, "We need to get a DNA test." I didn't say a word. I just nodded. Because deep down, I already knew I wouldn't survive what came next. The next morning felt like I was waking up inside a nightmare that hadn't ended. I opened my eyes hoping it was all some insane dream, but the silence in the house reminded me it was very real. Mark had slept on the couch, but I didn't check on him. I couldn't. I didn't want to see his face. Not yet. Everything felt off. I made coffee like I always did, but my hands were trembling. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Brielle had sat on our couch, my couch, rubbing her stomach like this was some reunion. Like we were all going to play happy family after she'd blown a hole through my entire reality. Mark eventually came into the kitchen, looking like he hadn't slept either. He said he'd already called a clinic to arrange the DNA test. She had agreed to it. Just like that. Almost too eagerly. I asked him why he thought it might be his. He didn't answer right away. Then he finally said that he hadn't used protection that night, and she had left town not long after. That he'd wondered briefly, but convinced himself that if it were his, she would have come back. That no news meant it wasn't. But now here we were. And the worst part was, I couldn't even scream at him. I felt too numb. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't even feel that. I think I was afraid that if I opened the door to my anger, it would destroy me. That day dragged. We barely spoke. I told him I needed space and locked myself in the bedroom with the dogs, who were the only source of comfort I had left. I scrolled through old photos of me and Brielle as kids, trying to understand how she could do this. Why now? Why this way? By evening, the questions in my head started twisting into paranoia. What if she didn't just want to tell the truth? What if she wanted to stay? What if she wanted more? That night, while Mark was sleeping, I did something I'm not proud of. I went through his phone. I needed to see if there had been anything between them since she left. I wanted proof that this wasn't some long-running affair or secret contact. I was bracing for the worst. But there was nothing. No calls, no messages, no emails. Just one unsent draft from a year ago. It said, "I'm sorry. I think about it more than I should. I know you're gone, but I wish we could talk." I didn't know what to do with that. He hadn't sent it. But he'd written it. And that meant something. I put the phone down and went to the bathroom to throw up. There's a difference between forgiveness and survival. And I didn't know yet which one I was trying to reach for. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If that baby was his, everything in my life was about to change forever. We met Brielle at the clinic 3 days later. I hadn't seen her since that bombshell of a visit, and honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready to face her again. But I needed answers. Real ones. Not guesses, not maybe, not silence, just truth. She looked calm, smug almost, like she'd won something. Her belly was massive, and she waddled into the waiting room like she owned the place. I felt sick watching Mark stand up to greet her. Not because he smiled, he didn't, but because there was a softness in his expression that I hadn't seen since the whole thing started. Like he felt responsible. Or guilty. Or something in between. The test was a simple non-invasive prenatal one. They took samples from both of them and said results would be ready in about a week. A week. 7 more days of waiting, overthinking, imagining my life in 2 versions, one where this baby wasn't his, and we'd somehow find a way to patch this nightmare, and the other, where my husband had a child with my sister. I couldn't look at Brielle during the test. I just stared at the floor. But she didn't stop looking at me. I could feel it, her eyes burning into the side of my face like she wanted me to acknowledge her. When it was done, she turned to me and said she hoped this didn't ruin things between us. That family's too important to throw away. I didn't even blink. I just walked out. Later that night, I asked Mark a question that had been chewing a hole in the back of my mind. I asked him if he loved her. He hesitated. That hesitation? That silence that lasted 2 seconds too long? It shattered me in a way nothing else had. He said no, eventually. That it wasn't like that. That it had never been like that. But I couldn't unhear the pause. It was like being punched in slow motion. The kind of pain that sneaks in instead of slamming you all at once. We didn't speak much after that. We went to bed on opposite sides, our backs to each other, the silence between us louder than any argument could have been. And I lay there the whole night, staring at the ceiling, bracing for the results. Because in my heart, I already knew the answer. The results came on a Thursday. I'll never forget the sound of the phone vibrating on the kitchen counter. It was early, too early for anything good. Mark reached for it first, and when I saw the clinic's name flash across the screen, my stomach dropped. He didn't say anything right away. Just opened the email, eyes scanning the screen with terrifying calm. I stood there frozen, waiting for a yes or no, but instead he just sat down. Slowly. Like his legs had given out. I didn't ask. I didn't have to. He finally whispered, "It's mine." And that was it. That one sentence split my entire world in half. I walked upstairs without a word, shut the bedroom door behind me and locked it. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, staring at nothing. The air felt thicker. The room smaller. My life, had just been rewritten by someone else's choices. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt irrelevant. But eventually, I got up, packed a small bag, and left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't slam the door. I just left. I went to stay with a friend. She didn't ask for details, just let me in and made tea like we were 15 again, hiding from a bad grade. I couldn't talk. Every time I tried, my throat closed up. But that night, lying on her guest room couch, I let myself feel it all. The betrayal. The humiliation. The gut-deep grief of watching the person you chose build a future without you. I cried until I couldn't breathe. Until there was nothing left but this numb, empty shell. And still, somehow, there was more to unravel. Because Brielle texted me. She said she was glad the truth was out. She said this was a fresh start. And she ended it with, "I hope you'll be a part of our lives. The baby deserves that." I dropped the phone on the floor and just stared at it like it had slapped me. Our lives. She was already imagining some twisted blended family fantasy, me as the aunt, her and Mark co-parenting, like this wasn't the most disgusting betrayal I'd ever experienced. And I realized something horrifying. She hadn't just come back to tell the truth. She had come back to stay. I didn't respond to her text. I couldn't. I was still trying to wrap my head around the fact that she thought there was a future where I'd smile at her baby like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't stolen a piece of my life, twisted it, and handed it back shattered. I stayed at my friend's house for a few days. Mark didn't call. He texted once, saying he was giving me space but wanted to talk whenever I was ready. The message felt robotic, like he didn't even know what to say anymore. Or maybe he was just afraid of what I'd say. Then came the next blow. My mom called. She knew. Brielle had told her everything, the affair, the baby, the test, all of it. And to my utter disbelief, she wasn't even that angry. She said she was shocked, yes. Disappointed, sure. But then she hit me with the line that nearly made me drop the phone. She said, "You know your sister's been through a lot, and maybe this baby is her way of healing." Healing. As if ruining my marriage was some therapeutic cleanse. I asked her if she realized what she was saying. If she really thought I was supposed to play supportive big sister to the woman who disappeared for 5 years and came back with my husband's child. She paused. Then said she just didn't want to lose either of us. That was when I realized this wasn't just a betrayal from Brielle and Mark. My own family was already trying to normalize it. To sweep it under some bizarre, dysfunctional rug and pretend we could all still sit at the same holiday table. I hung up. And for the first time in this whole mess, I felt something besides grief or rage. I felt clarity. I realized that no one was going to protect me from this. Not my husband. Not my sister. Not even my parents. If I wanted peace, I'd have to create it myself. And I'd have to start by tearing everything else down. I went back home 2 days later, not to make peace, not to talk, but to collect my things. The moment I stepped through the front door, I felt like a stranger in my own house. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, like he'd been waiting. His face was a mess of guilt and desperation. He stood up, started saying my name, but I held up my hand before he could get a word out. I told him I wasn't here to rehash the past. I wasn't ready for explanations or tears. I just wanted my clothes, my files, and the few things that still felt like mine. He followed me around the house anyway. Watching. Hovering. Offering to help carry boxes like that would erase the fact that he had blown a hole through our marriage. I ignored him as best I could, but when I went to grab a photo album from the top shelf in the closet, it slipped and scattered pictures across the floor. And there it was. A photo of the 3 of us, Amy, Mark, and Brielle, from years ago. A stupid beach trip we'd taken during that one summer she'd tried to be more stable. In the picture, Mark and I were holding hands. Brielle was behind us, arms around both of our shoulders, grinning wide. I stared at that photo like it was a crime scene. That same woman had vanished from my life without warning and then returned to destroy it from the inside. Mark knelt to help gather the photos. His hand brushed mine and I flinched. That was the first time he really looked broken. He asked if I was going to leave for good. I said I didn't know yet. And that was the truth. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I wanted a divorce, or if I even had the strength to walk away completely. What I did know was this: I couldn't share a life with a man who made choices behind my back and kept them buried until they grew into something that cried and needed diapers. As I zipped up the last bag, he said something that chilled me. He said Brielle wanted to move into town. She was looking at places nearby. To make co-parenting easier, he said. That's when I realized she wasn't just staying. She was planting herself right in the middle of our lives. And he wasn't stopping her. I walked out without saying goodbye. I didn't cry this time. I just drove. Because if I stayed even 1 second longer, I knew I'd never leave at all. I didn't stop driving until I was nearly out of state. No destination, no playlist, just me, the hum of the road, and a growing storm in my chest that I couldn't outrun. I booked a room in a quiet little motel off the highway, the kind of place with old quilts and vending machines that hum louder than your thoughts. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. I looked tired. Not just physically, but soul-tired. Like every part of me had been stretched too thin for too long. I realized I didn't even recognize the version of myself who used to smile in those old photos. The woman who trusted so easily, who thought forever meant something solid. I called my best friend, not the one I'd been staying with, but the one I'd drifted from years ago after getting married. She was shocked to hear from me, but when I told her the broad strokes of what had happened, she just said, "Tell me where you are." She showed up 5 hours later with takeout, a bottle of wine, and that face that only a true friend can give you when you're standing at the edge of ruin. We didn't talk much that first night. We just sat there and let silence do the heavy lifting. The next day, she drove me to a lawyer. Because for the first time since all of this started, I made a decision. I was going to file for divorce. Not because I didn't love Mark, I probably always would, in some buried, stupid corner of my heart, but because love isn't enough. Not when it's been contaminated. Not when someone chooses silence over truth. Not when your sister can walk into your life and rewrite the script, and your husband just lets it happen. When I left the lawyer's office, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Like I'd finally stopped drowning. That night, Brielle texted me again. "I know you're upset, but this doesn't have to tear us apart. We can be a family. The baby's going to need you too." I blocked her. Because whatever this was, it wasn't a family. It was fallout. And I was done being buried under the wreckage. A week after filing the papers, I got an email from Mark. Not a text. Not a call. An email. It was long, way too long, and started with how he'd respect my decision but still wanted to be heard. He talked about regret. About how what happened with Brielle was a one-time mistake that became a life-altering consequence. How he never stopped loving me, even after she came back. He even said he wished she had never returned at all. But the part that stuck with me most? He admitted that some part of him had hoped the baby wasn't his. Not because he didn't want to take responsibility, but because he wanted to keep our life intact. He wanted a version of reality where he could keep both truths separate, the one with me, and the one with her. And that was it. That line told me everything I needed to know. He didn't just cheat. He compartmentalized. He built a quiet little corner of his life where he could tuck away the worst thing he ever did and still pretend he was a good man. A faithful husband. A decent person. But the truth? Good men don't gamble their marriages on silence and hope the past doesn't come knocking. I didn't reply. 2 days later, my mom reached out again. She wanted to talk things through. Said maybe if I could just see Brielle, I'd understand. That the baby looked just like Mark, and wasn't that somehow a blessing in disguise? A blessing. It's funny how people twist betrayal into something poetic when they're not the ones bleeding from it. I asked her one thing: if Dad had done to her what Mark and Brielle did to me, would she have stayed? She went quiet. And that silence was louder than anything she could have said. Later that night, I got a ping from a fake social account I'd forgotten I made. It was Brielle. Posting photos. One of her holding the baby, newborn, still pink and wrinkled, eyes shut tight. The caption? "Meet the miracle. He has his father's eyes. Blackheart." I stared at that post for a long, long time. And something in me just hardened. Because there was no remorse, no shame. Not even acknowledgement that her miracle came from betrayal. Just pride. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I woke up the next morning with one final decision to make. Closure isn't something people hand you. It's something you carve out yourself, usually from bone. So I got dressed, packed my things, and drove home for the last time. Not to talk. Not to cry. To finish what needed finishing. When I pulled into the driveway, the front door was wide open. Mark was inside, pacing, clearly startled to see me. He started to speak, but I told him to stop. I wasn't here for apologies. I wasn't here for explanations. I was here to end it. I handed him an envelope with the finalized divorce paperwork and told him I was signing over my share of the house. I didn't want it. Let him have the walls they broke together. Let him raise his child there, build his new life in the ashes of mine. He looked stunned, like he thought maybe I'd come back to work things out. Maybe a part of him still believed that what we had could survive this. It couldn't. It shouldn't. Before I left, I told him one thing, that loving someone doesn't mean you have to keep letting them hurt you. And that I was done being the collateral damage in other people's stories. I got back in the car and didn't look back. That was 2 months ago. Since then, I've moved into a tiny apartment in a different city. It's not much, just a 1-bedroom with creaky floors and street noise, but it's mine. All mine. I've started therapy. I'm slowly reconnecting with people I lost while I was too busy playing house and keeping secrets I didn't even know existed. Sometimes I still get angry. Sometimes I still wake up reaching for the old life, forgetting for a second that it's gone. But then I remember, I chose peace. I chose myself. And I would do it again. Brielle's still posting photos of the baby. Sometimes Mark's in them. She hashtags everything with hashtag fresh start and hashtag forgiveness like she's already rewritten the narrative. But I'm not part of it anymore. And that's the most freeing part of all. Because I didn't lose everything. I walked away with the one thing none of them will ever get back from me. My self-respect. Thanks for reading, Reddit. I don't know what comes next, but for the first time in a long time, I'm finally okay not knowing.